Right. Would you ask Mr. Lamb to come back in, please? Right, ready to carry on, Mr. Lamb?
Certainly.
Good, thank you. Yes, Miss Grange.
Yes, thank you. Just to pick up on a couple of points from this morning before we carry on with the cavity barrier story. So I'll just get my transcript working. Would you agree with me that in general, the specification takes precedence over the drawings? So when you're coming to approach design work, it's the specification that's of higher importance in terms of telling you what to include in a design. Would you agree with that?
I think if it's a performance specification, I would agree, but not necessarily prescriptive.
But here on Grenfell, take cavity barriers.
Yeah.
We didn't get a prescriptive specification, did we?
No.
No. We had something more like a performance specification.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we know that the wall had to comply with CWCT guidance, it had to comply with the building regulations. There's express reference to fire breaks in accordance with ADB.
Yeah.
So it's a performance specification, isn't it?
To a degree, yes.
On cavity barriers.
Yeah.
And it's not until Harley come along that the ciderised cavity barriers are specified, is it?
No, that's right.
So the point I want to put to you is that even if cavity barriers weren't shown in particular locations by the architect on the drawings, why didn't the specification, the NBS specification, take precedence in terms of what Harley should have been designing?
I don't think you could convey the requirement for positioning cavity barriers adequately in the NBS. I think you would generally rely on the drawings to show you where they went.
Why wasn't it adequate to say fire stopping or fire breaks in accordance with approved document B? Why wasn't that more than adequate?
Because it was the architect that was ensuring compliance to document B. Surely it's his place to interpret document B and then show them on his drawings.
But in terms of cavity barriers around the windows, you don't need any interpretation of approved document B, do you? Approved document B is clear. I think you accepted paragraph 9.3 was crystal clear that cavity barriers are required around windows.
Yes, but as we've noted before, there are many routes to compliance, and this may well have been a fire-engineered solution.
Yes, but we've looked at emails, haven't we, Mr. Lamb? We've looked at emails very recently in the context of the cavity barrier discussion where people are referring to diagram 33 of ADB.
Yes, but if that comes from a supplier, it doesn't necessarily correlate that that's what the architect's after.
But you don't ever see an email from anybody on the project saying, oh, all very nice what's in ADB, but that's not what we're following. You don't see that, do you?
Nor do we have a very precise email saying exactly what is required.
Okay. Well, we'll keep going with the story and let's see what we find. Just one more question, though, before I pick that up. We talked about the raising of the cavity barrier up at the head of the window.
Yeah.
Did Ray Bailey tell you to move it, or was it your idea to move it?
Oh, no, it would be part of the team's opinion, yes.
What does that mean, part of the team's opinion?
Well, whether it was actually Ray Bailey, I mean, I would have been instructed to do it, but I wouldn't recall if Ray actually said, you must put it here. It might have been one of the other members of the team saying, we ought to put it there to ensure adequate sealing against the structure. I don't recall.
Can you recall whether it was your idea to raise it up?
Oh, no, it certainly wasn't my idea.
I see. So what you're saying is that must have come from somebody within the Harley design team
Yes.
to instruct you to do that?
Yes.
And you wouldn't have done it otherwise?
No. This was, again, as we've mentioned before, there were certain key concept details that were discussed around the table. And I think it's not beyond the realms of expectation that this was a key concept.
Can we be more precise? You say it's not beyond the realms of expectation that this was a key concept.
Well,
Are you speculating as to whether
no,
that was discussed?
This is a key concept.
Right.
And it would have been discussed around the table.
And do you have a memory of it actually being discussed?
Vaguely, but not in specific terms.
Okay. Now, let's just pick up where we were in the thread. We'd looked at some concerns from the building control officer, John Hoban, that the fire integrity of the cavity barriers ought to be 120 minutes. And I want to pick up, if we go to SEA 13001, this is on the 25th of March. You send an email to Simon Lawrence, copying in the team again, saying, Simon, further to our meeting yesterday, please find attached details for the fire breaks, all now upgraded to 20 minutes. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes.
And these are general arrangement drawings.
Yeah.
And our understanding is that upgrading of 120 minutes that you did at that point was to the fire breaks at levels 3 to 23 or 4 to 23. It wasn't.
If that's where they are, then yes. But I do recall being asked to change them. And you'll find that there was a quotation supplied to Rydens to actually upgrade them because it was never expected at the beginning of the project.
Yeah. So we've got that. And then if we looked now at RYD 3037117 on page 1, here we see Ray Bailey to Simon Lawrence, Neil Crawford, Ben Bailey on the 27th of March 2015, CCing you and others. Hi Simon, reading the email from the specialist suppliers. It should be fairly straightforward. A fire stop is required to stop fire spreading between floors or party walls if it's inside the building, i.e. inside of the window or curtain wall. A cavity barrier is required to stop fire spreading inside the cavity. For the fire to enter the cavity, it has to have gone through the window or curtain wall. In our situation, the cladding is outside of the windows, and therefore it should have a cavity barrier as opposed to a fire stop. I would ask Neil to make this point. Best regards, Ray. Do you see that there?
Yes. Yeah.
So Harley haven't given up at this point. They're maintaining their position that it should be a cavity barrier, not a fire stop.
That's right. I think this was following the email trail. Clearly showed there was some confusion amongst parties. I think Ray was involved to try and explain how he understood
Yes.
the terminology.
Yes, that sounds fair. Now, turning to the email briefly at the bottom of page 1 and going on to the top of page 2. From Neil Crawford on the 27th of March. Just have a look at that on the top of the next page. Simon, I've spoken with John and he wasn't happy with Harley's email as we're talking about fire stopping as opposed to cavity barriers. I've explained again the specifics of our scenario and he will have a conversation with Paul Hanson to see if there's a reduced spec they can agree to and will then speak with Harley's directly. Do you see that there?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's what the architect was saying. And can we now go to HAR 403947. This is another part of the same exchange that was occurring at this time on the topic of cavity barriers. And I want to look at the email at the top of the page first. This is Ben Bailey to Ray Bailey, to you, to Mark Stapley. It's on the 30th of March 2015.
Yeah.
You see that? And he's saying, still going around in circles, best regards, Ben.
Yes. Yeah, that's just highlighting the fact that we're still not getting any closer a final solution.
To a resolution on this issue.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of this chain here, if we go to the bottom of page 7, some of these chains are very long. I just want to look at the bottom of page 7. We can see Ricky Kay sends an email on the 26th of March 2015 at 13:42 to Ben Bailey, copying in you, Mark Stapley, Sue Shepherd. And he says, "Hi Ben, apologies for the delay. Please find below extract from the approved document B of the building regulations."
Yeah.
And then on to the next page. Here you can see that it clearly states that 30 minutes fire integrity and 15 minutes insulation is all that's required from a cavity fire barrier. This is reference to rain screen cladding applications where the cavity barrier is deemed to be on the outside of the building. Our RH25 9030 will offer 90 minutes fire integrity and 30 minutes fire insulation, therefore exceeds minimum requirements. 120-minute fire rating is generally the industry standard for curtain wall to concrete slab edge fire stopping, where the fire stop is located on the inside of a building and is considered to be a continuation of the floor slab. Please get in touch if you need anything else from us to enable you to progress with your order. Many thanks, Ricky Kay.
Yeah.
Now, we note there, don't we, that he's got an extract from approved document B. Do you see that there?
That's right, yes, from Siderise, yes.
And if we go to the email immediately above this, Neil Crawford, we see Neil Crawford to John Hoban. Hi, John. There's been a lot of conversation on site about the cavity fire barrier requirements to be fitted between the existing concrete external wall panels and the new external rain screen aluminium cassettes. Can you please see the proposal by the cladding contractor below and confirm it if it is acceptable to you? You see that there?
Yep, yep.
Now, Mr. Crawford doesn't say, does he, in response to Mr. Kay's email, no, you've got this wrong. We're not following approved document B. We've got a fire engineered solution. Our fire engineers looked at this and we're doing something different. He doesn't say that, does he?
He doesn't, no.
And in forwarding to Mr. Hoban that Ricky Kay email with the extract from approved document B, would you agree with me that it would appear from this, and you would have understood at the time, it's my suggestion, that the professionals on this project did think they were following approved document B as their route to compliance?
No, I think that's your interpretation. I don't think you could necessarily interpret it one way or another, not in this instance.
You couldn't?
No.
So the fact that Neil Crawford is saying to the building control officer, can you please see the proposal by the cladding contractor below and confirm if it is acceptable to you, and that cladding contractor is setting out an extract from approved document B, his interpretation, and saying we exceed these minimum requirements, you don't think that's an indication that Neil Crawford thought they were following approved document B?
I think it's a useful bit of documentation, but I certainly wouldn't have interpreted that one way or the other.
I would suggest when you put emails like that together with what you say in your witness statement about consulting approved document B in relation to the cavity barrier requirement,
Yeah.
that it was obvious that at the time that was the route to compliance you all thought you were following.
No, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I think there's no other way to seek any information in the climate where there seems to be very little actual action as to what was required.
Well, I put the point one more time that we don't see any email, do we, or any communication where anyone is saying we are not following approved document B on this project. We don't find that, do we?
No, but then we don't say we are.
Well, I think we'll leave the point there. Now, Mr. Kay goes on to request a drawing of the build-up of the cladding to send to his technical officer. If we look at the bottom of page 4 of this chain and the top of page 5, so Ricky Kay on the 30th of March 2015, it's in the same chain. If we look at what he says at the top of page 5, please can somebody forward over a drawing of the build-up of the cladding so that my technical officer can evaluate and forward an official response with a siderised product specification. Many thanks, Ricky Kay.
Yeah. Don't forget at this stage I don't seem to be copied into these emails.
I understand that. I'm just trying to build up to what we do see shortly,
Of course.
which is an email sent by Mr. Mort at Siderise. So let's go, I want to go to the second email now on page 1. So this is from Chris Mort to Ben Bailey and Ricky Kay. And just before we read this email, if we go to the top of the chain, it's this that you're forwarded
Yeah.
on the 30th of March when Ben Bailey says still going around in circles.
Yeah.
Do you see that? And there's a number of attachments there
Yeah.
to that. So you're forwarded this email from Chris Mort, Sideriser's technical officer. And if we go back to that email,
I wouldn't necessarily have read all the way down and in depth.
well, it's the email immediately below the very short email you're sent from Ben Bailey. Are you saying you wouldn't have read this email here from Mr. Mort?
The fact that the email starts, we're still going round in circles, implies to me there's still no resolution. So I'm still waiting for an answer as far as an instruction from Harley as to what I should be doing.
I see.
I mean, by this stage, Ben has clearly picked up the baton and he's running with this. I've taken a step back at this point, just waiting for his instruction.
Well, let's just see what this email says, and I will then ask you some questions about it. He says, "Hi, Ben. I have reviewed the drawings sent over and sketch a proposal to alleviate the issues raised by the BCO, Building Control Officer." Yes?
Yes? Yeah.
Also, on the second page of the attachment, I have highlighted the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire, and I think the BCO would have noticed this. And then he says the proposal requires the installation of RH259060 product in 2 layers, one at the head of the window aligning with the compartment floor, and the other at the top of the existing upstand, therefore 2 layers of 60 minutes protection that overall would provide, if tested, over 120 minutes protection at the window locations. Please note that without specific details of the overall construction of internal linings and or site of the fire strategy for the project, I can only offer the proposal above, and as this is a refurbishment, I would imagine that the internal linings will remain in situ and made good to openings only, which does not aid the fire strategy. At the shear wall locations, I cannot see any justification for anything other than a cavity barrier at 30/15 rating, so subject to BCO approval, you may be able to downgrade in these locations. Now, if we can just go over the page, I hope this helps in resolving the design detail for the compartment on this project. You see that?
Yes, I say that.
If we can go back to the main part of that email then. I've just helped familiarise yourself with it.
Yeah.
Did you read this email when you were forwarded it on the project?
I'm sure I would have scanned it, but as it's, as I've said before, further down the trail of an email that's headed that we're not any closer the solution, it would have just been an element of scanning.
Did you notice at the time that in the very first paragraph of that email, Mr. Mort is saying that on the second page of the attachment, he's highlighted the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire? Did you notice that at the time?
Not at the time, no.
Did you notice that at any point during the Grenfell project?
I don't believe so, no.
You don't believe so?
No.
Because I would suggest that what we see in this email is he's doing 2 things. He's saying he's highlighted the weak link in terms of fire, and then he's trying to offer a solution of how you get the 120 minutes protection with his products, and he's saying you could use it in 2 layers, one at the head of the window aligning with compartment floor and the other at the top of the existing upstand.
But that's to provide 120 minutes.
Yes.
It wasn't required.
I understand that. What he's trying to do is help. If 120 minutes is required, he's trying to explain how you could do it. Do you agree?
Yes, by adding an extra cavity barrier in, yes.
Yes. But I would suggest he's also, in the first paragraph, making clear that he's highlighted the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire. So he's doing 2 things in this email. He's highlighting a weak link for fire, and we're going to look at the attachments in a moment.
Well,
and he's trying to help as to how you can get 120 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's interpretation. I would struggle to read it one way or the other, but I would never have read that with any in any great depth.
So you're saying you agree with me looking at it now, but you would never have read this email in any great depth at the time?
No, I don't agree. What I'm saying is you could interpret that to highlight a weak link,
Yeah.
but you could also interpret it that it's a weak link, bearing in mind we're trying to achieve 120 minutes.
I see. Do you recall opening the attachments that were forwarded to you at this time?
Were they on the top page?
Yes.
I may well have done.
So if we look at the top page, we can see that a number of attachments are sent with this. And what I want to do now is look at that attachment. This is HAR 403948. So this is the first page, and we can see that what Mr. Mort appears to have done is, on the far right-hand side in particular, we've now got some blue and orange sketches that he's done coming out from the window. And what we can see is he's got 2 cavity barriers in there to get to your 120. Do you see that?
Yes, this actually clarifies that this is a solution to achieve 180 or 120 minutes.
Yes, so here he's got one above the head of the window and one further up, what he calls the upstand.
That's right.
Below the sill of the window, not immediately below it, but further up it, yes?
Yeah, just so as he can reach a rating that was never required in the end.
Yeah. Now, you didn't end up having that second one, did you? In
No,
the end?
no.
No. But if we look at the second page of the drawing, this is a drawing of the window head. It's a drawing we were looking at in detail earlier.
Yeah.
And you see he's put a big orange bubble around the interface between the window frame and the head of the cladding system there.
Yes, yeah.
And he's put weak link for fire. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Did you see this drawing at the time you were working on the Grenfell project?
No, I didn't. No.
So you didn't look at the attachments that Ben Bailey sent to you in that email in any detail?
No.
Would you agree that it's highlighting a weak link for fire, which is exactly the weak link we were discussing earlier, and whether that was a weak link for fire that ought to be addressed with a cavity barrier at the head of the window?
No, I don't agree with that because he hasn't shown a cavity barrier at the top of the window on his previous drawing.
No, what I would suggest to you is he's highlighting something separate from that.
Really?
He's giving you a cavity barrier solution, but he's also saying there's a weak link for fire here and checking that someone's thought about that. Is that not a fair interpretation of the email and that drawing?
He's got a concern.
Now, if you didn't look at it at the time, do you ever recall discussing this weak link for fire with Ben Bailey or anyone else at Harley who might have had it drawn to their attention?
No, to be honest, I don't recall seeing the first drawing either.
So you don't remember Ben or Ray or Daniel or anybody saying to you, well, Cider Eyes have highlighted a weak link for fire, we obviously need to look at that. You don't recall that?
No, at this stage, we're quite a way into the design. At this stage, I'm just waiting for instruction from Ben. He's not going to say, oh, we've had an email, oh, it's inconclusive. He's only going to instruct me once it has been concluded.
Do you mean you were waiting for an instruction as to what rating to put the cavity barrier
No.
above the window?
Waiting for an instruction from Ben what drawing work still needed to be done.
I see.
He was actively searching the requirements for cavity barriers. Once he had that fulfilled, then it would be translated to me and I would add it to the drawings.
Is it possible that what happened is everyone thought, well, it's too late now, we've decided on the positioning of the cavity barriers?
Not a
This has
chance.
come in too late, we're not going to think about that?
I would be amazed if anyone thought that.
Okay. So you didn't discuss these annotations with anybody on the project?
No. These came to light after the event.
And this drawing, I think this drawing gets to revision F, but we're not aware of any further revisions made to the drawing in the light of these comments by Mr. Mort. So can you confirm that there was nothing that changed in terms of that configuration that's in the orange bubble? Nothing changed subsequently?
No, but don't forget, this is a comment from a subcontractor or a supplier that wasn't necessarily in full knowledge of the circumstance.
But it's not just any old supplier, is it? It's Siderise, who wouldn't you expect them to know quite a lot about cavity barriers, how they operate, how they're tested?
Certainly, but I think he does say in his email, doesn't he, earlier on, that he hasn't got full information.
You're right, he does say that, and that's why I read that part of the email to you. But it's Siderise's technical officer, isn't it?
Yeah, but if he hasn't got the information, he can't give constructive advice. He's concerned. Maybe he's thinking, I don't know, maybe he's thinking that internal board is a flammable board. Maybe he's thinking the bracketry isn't continuous. I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking.
Isn't it likely that he was aware of approved document B, aware of lots of industry guidance at this time that
Definitely.
Cavity barriers around windows were required?
Definitely.
And was highlighting that at the head of the window there ought to be some form of cavity barrier?
No, I don't think he says that in his email.
Going back to the comments you made earlier about your concern about the integrity of a barrier fixed against the bottom of that concrete,
Yes,
and
yeah.
degraded, etc. Did you ever think about whether you could include something different there, perhaps not mineral wool, but a steel angle? So do you agree with me that approved document B does envisage that other materials could form proper cavity barriers, including steel?
Yes, it certainly does. However, if the proposal that we made was acceptable, there's no need for any of that.
Well, forget for a moment what Studio E did and whether they picked this up. Just in terms of your own work, was it ever considered that there could be a different solution to a cavity barrier in this location? If you were worried about putting something like a Siderise cavity barrier in that location, as shown by Mr. Hyatt, was there ever any consideration to, for example, putting a metal angle as per Section 9 of ADB?
You could have put a metal angle or a Z section on the inside of the extruded aluminium angle.
Yeah,
I guess that would be something that could be proposed.
yeah. But no consideration was ever given to that?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
I just want to, I'm going to put to you a few other of the diagrams from Mr. Hyatt's report on cavity barriers. We've looked
Sure.
a lot at the head position, but I want to look at a couple of other of the window positions.
Incidentally, on the email, I think he implies that the cavity barrier at the head should align with the slab anyway.
With the compartment floor?
Yes.
Yes, let's
Which,
go
if
back.
it was in the position of Hyatt, wouldn't be aligning.
Yeah, let's go back, in fairness to you, let's go back to the email. So it's HAR 403947. It's the bottom of page 1. That is what he says in the second paragraph. He says it's aligning with the compartment floor.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
And I think that's why we see, when we go back to his first sketch, where he's offering his solution of 120 minutes, if we go back to HAR 403948, I think what you're saying is that when he's offering his solution on the right-hand side, the lower cavity barrier, the orange cavity barrier, is in line with your cavity barrier above the head of the window, yes?
I think that's actually confusing. That doesn't follow what I understand his email to mean.
Because what you're saying is his email should mean lower than that, because he's showing the concrete floor as lower than that.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. But he's shown it slightly higher.
Yeah.
My suggestion to you about this is really him trying to show how you can put two of the barriers in to get 120.
That's
And
right.
that perhaps the more important sketch from your point of view was the second sketch with the weak link for fire.
Mm.
Do you agree with that?
Maybe. I don't think you can. I think that's a little bit out of context. Without understanding his thinking, why is it a weak link? I think it's really difficult to be sure of what he meant there. Because it appears that this sketch shows exactly that lower cavity barrier, exactly where we've placed it. He's just added an additional one to get the 120 minutes
Yes.
at the windowsill.
Yes.
So by virtue of that, does that not mean he's happy with the position of it?
Well, we may be able to ask him. I think he may be coming to give evidence in due course.
Well, that would be
We
a
can ask
good,
him.
yeah.
But the point I'm putting to you is that the second sketch, the weak link for fire, ought to have set in train a process of examination and investigation within Harley and within the scope of your design
I think
work.
it's quite clear that it was already in motion.
What was already in motion?
The fact of a requirement of clarification of these cavity barriers.
But what they were seeking clarification of was the rating of the cavity barrier and whether or not it should be 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 60 minutes, 120 minutes. They weren't debating exactly the positioning of the cavity barriers, were they?
I don't know. I find it's difficult to be sure what's going on because there seems to be, well, possibly a lack of clarity throughout these emails of what is required, what is being asked, and what is being given.
Right, okay. Well, I think we have your evidence about whether you looked at that sketch and had any discussions about it. So I'm going to take you to look at some of Mr. Hyatt's diagrams. Before we do, I just want to show you, we're talking this morning about cutting cavity barriers around cladding rails.
Yes.
And in the time available, we found an image. It may not be the best image available, but we'll have a look at it. It's BLAR 703 at page 53. So if we can blow up that image on the bottom left, the photograph with the two circles. Now, I think having blown that up, am I right that the black line down the middle is the rail for the rail-on panels?
Correct.
And they are hooked on to that little bolt that we see at the top, aren't they?
That's right.
And if we look at the bottom of that page, mainly what we're seeing there behind the rail is the quantity of insulation. I think it was 2 layers of 80 millimetres, either Celotex RS 5000 or Kingspan K15.
Yeah,
Do you
certainly
see
looks
on
like
the,
that, yes.
the spandrel? And then below that, we can see the cavity barriers.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
They've got silver on the top. They've got a black face, which is the intermittent strip
That's correct.
on the side. And the point I was putting to you and was asking whether anyone discussed it within Harley, whether you thought about it, was that the cavity barriers, and this is consistent all across the building, they don't carry through the cladding rail, or there's no solution within the cavity rail to replicate the cavity barrier. They're cut around it.
No, that's right.
And that's why I'm asking whether anyone ever thought about whether or not that was an unsatisfactory arrangement and that there ought to be some consideration of
Well, I think
dealing
cavity.
with that vertical gap through the cavity barrier.
In my experience, it's not something that is ever done. You don't fill it with an insulation. But maybe the argument is that the cavity barriers are to stop the spread, the unseen spread of flame. If a flame gets into that black zone,
Yeah.
you can see it from between the gaps in all the panels from outside.
Really?
Yes.
I see.
If you
What if
zoom-
your firefighters are at an angle to that rail, or what if that rail's on the 23rd floor or the 22nd floor?
I can't answer that. All I'm saying is in my experience, it's not normal to try and put a cavity barrier inside that rail.
I see. So that's just something that everybody does, is it?
I would say so. I mean, that's in my experience, with my limited experience. Harley, with their far greater experience, didn't concern them to fill those gaps.
No. So you never have had a discussion with anybody at Harley about that?
No.
And it never occurred to you that that might somehow defeat the logic of putting a cavity barrier
No, I
in
don't
those
think it
locations?
does defeat the logic. But,
And your justification is that firefighters would be able to see through the gaps in the sides of the panels and see that the fire was there. Is that your justification?
I wouldn't say it's my justification. All I can assume is that may be one of the industry reasons why it's not considered.
But you can't give us any authoritative evidence on that, can you? Because you're not
No.
experienced in this area.
No.
Now, Paul Hyatt, in his report, we've looked at the head of the window. He's also addressed cavity barriers at the window jambs and the sills. Let's look at the jambs first. PHYR 603 at page 64. And if we could blow that up, this is figure 3.28 from section 3 of his report. What he's done is, with the solid red line, he's shown the position of the cavity barrier as indicated on the Harley drawings.
Yeah.
And then in the dotted red line, he has shown the cavity barrier position at window jamb in order to meet ADB section 9, paragraph 9.3. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we can see it's an irregular shape. It's not a easy shape there, and I think he acknowledges that in his report. And his evidence, and to be clear, he will be giving evidence on this and he will be asked about this, is that you could either ask for a bespoke cavity barrier to be made to deal with that gap, or you could use compressible mineral wool, rock wool, to pack it in to that shape so that you've got protection at the jamb of the window.
Yes. Yeah. Makes sense.
And my question to you is, why was no consideration ever given by Harley or yourself in your design work to protecting the sides of the windows, the jambs, with some kind of arrangement, either of that nature or something similar that would achieve what ADB and other regulation, other guidance requires, which is cavity barriers around the windows?
I was working on instruction from Harley, and the architect clearly saw all of our drawings and approved them, and they were based on his details. So
I appreciate that about the architect, but if we could just put that aside for one moment, I appreciate you're saying the architect should have picked this up and that your position is it was his role. But in terms of Harley, we know that it wasn't a prescriptive specification for cavity barriers. It was a performance specification, or more of a performance specification. You said you were aware of the relevant regulatory requirements. Can you explain why there's no cavity barrier in this location? Was that ever discussed within Harley and the design team?
at one of our round tables it was discussed that we would provide cavity barriers as shown by the architect.
So then you just went away and you interpreted the drawings we saw before,
Yes.
and you produced...
I produced exactly what you see now,
Yeah, okay.
with the full approval of Harley.
And you didn't ever have a conversation with anybody at Studio E to check and say, why aren't we putting cavity barriers along the jambs of the windows?
No, but we did make a clear drawing approval request for the drawings showing these.
Okay. And if we go within this to page 65, the next page of Mr. Hyatt's report, here we can see the sill of the window And there's no cavity barrier in a red block here because no cavity barrier was indicated in this location on either the Studio E or the Harley drawings. That's correct, isn't it?
Correct, yes.
And so he is saying in the dotted line, it's his evidence that a cavity barrier ought to have been provided at the sill location per the guidance in ADB section 9, paragraph 9.3. You see that there?
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
And again, in terms of that sill location, can you help us as to whether that was ever discussed within the Harley design team?
I say what I said before, you know, the whole scope was discussed around the table.
So nothing specific about sill location versus jam location, just
No,
the scope discussed more generally, and you were told to do what was on the Studio E drawings?
that's correct, yes. One horizontal barrier around the whole building on each floor level and one vertical cavity barrier on each party wall column.
Okay. Can we just turn up some of the transcript from Mr. Anquetil-Jones's evidence? This is day 37, page 52, line 5. So, actually, let's pick it up at the top of that page, where Mr. Anquetil-Jones is asked, I appreciate what you've said about the architects, but can you help us as to why nobody at Harley picked up that there ought to be cavity barriers around the windows? See that there?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a sense of deja vu in terms of the question. And then Mr. Anquetil-Jones said this, talking from hindsight and looking back, there were lots and lots of projects that didn't have cavity barriers around the windows. I don't think that it was known within the industry or appreciated because of the conversation from cavity masonry walls to rain screen cladding. I think that a lot of people thought that it was something you did for cavity walls rather than the rain screen cladding. So I don't think that anyone at Harley knew that, and it doesn't appear that anybody further up the design team knew that as well. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So he appears to say that no one at Harley knew that cavity barriers were required around windows in a rain screen facade.
That's what he says, yes.
Now, did you know at the time that approved document B and other guidance did require cavity barriers around windows in rain screen facades?
Not explicitly.
Is it your evidence that you knew that they were required for masonry walls but not for rain screen cladding?
I wouldn't concern myself with masonry walls, but I was well aware of many routes to compliance.
Did you ever check, for example, the CWCT technical guidance that you referred to in your witness statement, or any other industry guidance to see whether cavity barriers were required in rain screen systems around windows?
No, that was going beyond my remit, although, as I've said before, I did actually look at these documents to see if there was obvious recommendation, but there seemed to be very little that could be taken from these documents. And of course, I was reliant on Harley telling me their requirements.
If we go back to CWCT Technical Note 73, just briefly want to look at this again with you. So it's CWCT 5019 at page 4. And I want to look at the foot of page 4 and on to page 5. This guidance was from 2011, and it's guidance that you confirm you did consult in paragraph 50 of your statement.
Yes, briefly, yeah.
And I want to look at the foot of page 4 and on to page 5, and it says there, for rain screen walls, ADB requires that cavity barriers are provided to close the edges of cavities, including around window openings. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes.
It's very clear in that guidance, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Mm.
And just to be clear, what is your evidence about whether you knew about that at the time of the Grenfell project?
Yes, I had. I was kind of aware of it. Yes.
You were kind of aware of it.
Yeah, well, as I've said before, there are routes to compliance. If an architect, as part of a professional team, deem it's not necessary, I've got no reason to doubt that.
I see. Now, the Chalcott project, you've told us that you worked very briefly on that project.
That's correct,
for
yes.
Harley.
Yeah.
That was in the transcript, we don't need to turn it up, day 37, page 69, lines 6 to 21. And we know that when you came to work on the Grenfell project, you were provided with some drawings on the Ferrier project.
That's right.
Now, when you came to work on the Grenfell project, were you provided with any information in relation to the Chalcott's project and the cladding design there?
Not at all, no.
Were you told that there'd been a fire at Taplow House on the Chalcott's estate?
No.
Can we turn up a report that was prepared into that Chalcott's fire by Harley? This is CEP 503223. This is a fire damage report that was prepared by Harley. Do you recognise this at all?
No, I was never shown that.
You were never shown that?
No.
And page 2 of the report, in the last sentence, we see it talks about damage to the fabric of the building structure following the fire, and then it says in the last sentence there, however, the fire was contained from spreading to over floors by the extensive fire breaks located at the head and sill of each window. Do you see that there?
Yes, yeah.
And if we go to page 20, what we can see in this report is there are 2 window jamb details
Yeah.
from the drawings at Chalcott. And if we can blow up the left-hand diagram, what we can see here is that there's a label on that says 100mm rock wool duo slab insulation to face of structure returned at window jambs to act as fire barrier. Do you see that there?
Yes, yeah.
So this appears to suggest that in a previous Harley project, rock wool duo slab insulation had been returned at the window jambs to act as a fire barrier, yes?
It looks like it, yeah.
Yeah. But that's not something you were ever made aware of
No,
during your time discussing fire barriers with the Harley team.
no.
Moving on then, cavity barriers around the crown. At paragraph 35 of your witness statement, I don't think we need to turn this up, you say that the design of this feature was left until quite late on,
Yeah.
as you were focused on the 20 floors of the cladding zone. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you ever, during the time you were looking at the design of the crown, consider compliance of the crown with the building regulations or approved document B?
The crown was designed based on very brief drawings from the architect and a design team meeting on site.
So again, are you saying that you were reliant on what the architect had done and what the design team at Harley were telling you?
That's correct, yeah.
Did you ever consider whether there ought to be cavity barriers in the location of the crown to deal with flame spread up at the top of the building?
Yes, there's always a consideration at the top. In my experience, if the top of a building is inhabited, then you would have a cavity barrier at the very top. In this case, it wasn't, so it wasn't necessarily required. However, the architect's drawing does clearly show one. But I think that was another item that we discussed. The drawing was issued without for the architect to comment upon.
I see. Are you talking about the cavity barrier here at the head of the cladding system?
Yes, yeah, the very last one.
Now, you deal with this, I think, in paragraph 36 of your witness statement. If we can go to that, this is at page 10. And at paragraph 36, you say, insofar as the positioning of a cavity barrier beneath the crown is concerned, the typical bay drawings, and then you list those, show cavity barriers above all windows. The crown drawings, and then you list those, do not show cavity barriers above the windows, nor does the specific detail.
Correct.
A screenshot from the CAD model for the project representing drawings 330 to 332 shows a blue annotation stating fire break. I made this note to remind myself to consider the requirement. This did not happen because I never revisited the drawings to revise further or raise for construction as I had expected to. To be clear, the annotation does not appear in printed copies of the drawings. It only appears on screen when you're working on CAD because it's on non-printing layer.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So is what you're saying that when you were first working on these drawings, you made yourself a little blue annotation stating fire break at the head of the building to remind yourself to consider that requirement?
Yes, what it was, this was after our discussion, my discussion at Harley. They felt that there was no need for cavity barrier at the top, and I had no reason to doubt that. But the reason I put a note on my CAD drawing was to just check when we had comments back from the architect. It was so that I just double-checked if he'd made a comment as far as a fire break requirement.
But just taking that in stages, you say that after our discussion, your discussion at Harley,
Yeah.
they felt there was no need for a cavity barrier at the top.
Yeah.
Who was they?
I don't know. Ray and Ben, maybe. Can't be exact.
And can you have any recollection as to when in the project you were having that discussion about no need for a cavity barrier at the top of the building?
Probably days before this drawing was issued.
Right. If we go to that exhibit there, KL23, and we find that at HAR 3010427, this is, I think, the CAD drawing that you're
That's
referring
correct,
to. And this is the electronic version where you can see your blue annotations, is that correct?
That's right, yes.
And are we looking at the head, the very top of the cladding system at Grenfell?
That's correct, yes.
And is the annotation that you're referring to the word fire break in blue on the left?
Yes, yes.
So you made this blue annotation saying fire break. You say you expected to come back and revisit this drawing later, but in fact you never revisited it, so that fire break was never included. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. This drawing was issued for comment. It came back from the architect status A,
Yes.
but for whatever reason, it was overlooked. We never reissued the drawing as construction issue.
I see.
However, we could take it as a status A is acceptable.
I see. So there was another opportunity to pick this up, but it just wasn't picked up.
That's right, yeah.
And there was no checking process or quality control process in place that might have meant that that was picked up in practice?
Well, no, the architect approved the drawing without a fire break.
But you yourself had noticed that it was likely to be required, yeah, and you put a note for yourself.
No. There's confusion. When you do the final fire break at the top of a cladding, it is generally considered in the industry, if there was, say, a penthouse above here where people were living,
Yeah,
that should have a fire break
right,
or a cavity barrier.
yeah,
If it's just a flat area with nothing up there, then there's no need to put a fire break.
right.
Now, this was an uninhabited area. All it had was a lift-over building.
So at the time you made this little note to yourself, did you know that there was going to be nothing at the top of the building?
Yes.
But you nevertheless thought that a fire break was required at this point?
No. That was just to remind myself to check if the architect had sent his drawings back with a comment that we had to have a fire break.
Yeah,
I mustn't forget to put it in,
I see.
because then the team on site may not put it in.
I see. So it was only if the architect came back and showed it that you needed to put it in?
That's correct. Yeah.
I see. Window infill panels. If we can go to that topic, which is our last main topic. Now, if we pick it up at paragraph 63 of your statement on page 16, you say this. You say, in relation to the infill panels, I was told that we were using products from panel systems,
Yeah.
as can be seen from drawings, and then you list some drawings. The two panels used in the window system within a typical bay from floor 4 to the top of the building are referred to as P1 and P2. Yes?
That's correct, yes.
Now, just focusing on that, you say, I was told that we were using products from panel systems.
Yeah.
Do you recall who told you that you were using products from panel systems?
Ben.
Ben, you clearly
That's
remember that, do you?
Without a doubt, yes. Yeah.
How come you're so clear on that when, in relation to other discussions, you can't be sure who it was that told you?
Because he was doing purchasing,
Yeah.
and at the time, what they would do is products would have to come from suppliers that they use, so as they can get credit and what have you. So I remember asking Ben, where are we getting these panels from?
Yeah.
He says, go to panel systems. There's no one else in the company at that point
Yeah.
that, or maybe Mark Stapley, but I know I didn't talk to Mark.
You know, you didn't talk to Mark.
Didn't talk to Mark Stapley, no.
Okay. And on your understanding, was it Ben who specified these panels for use?
He said we would go to panel systems,
Right.
and all they offered were single colour panels with a styrofoam core.
I see. So is it your evidence that you were told you had to go to panel systems,
Yeah.
and when you went to panel systems, you only had one choice, which was aluminium skinned with a styrofoam core?
That's correct, yes.
Now, if we look at the NBS specification, SEA 50169 at page 145, here at item 332, we get aluminium windows fixed unit. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes.
And under panel facing type,
Mhm.
so that's the second bullet down, it says aluminium faced insulated panel comprising core insulation, aluminium lining panel and integrated channel profile around perimeter, fully air sealed at edges to achieve a minimum U value of 0.15. Do you see
Yes.
that there?
Yeah.
Do you remember reading that in the NBS specification, that that was what had been specified?
Yes,
Or-
yes, but there is no specification for the core
No,
material there.
so this wasn't a prescriptive bit of the specification, was it? It was a performance specification.
No, I think that was overlooked
Overlooked by who?
by whoever drew up the NBS.
Well, aren't they giving some flexibility as to what's used there?
Well, maybe that is the reason for that, which is why we would put what we were proposing on a drawing for them to approve.
Actually, to be fair, I may have been wrong. But we look, and there is a manufacturer there,
Yeah,
Wicona. Is that the manufacturer of the windows or
that's the manufacturer of the aluminium windows.
Yeah, I see. So that's not telling you
No,
who the manufacturer is for the insulated panel composing
Yeah.
the core insulation.
and just out of interest, that isn't the window system that was used on the
No.
job.
Yes, correct.
There are holes.
And if we can look on elevation drawing HAR 408886. Just want to be clear exactly which panels we're talking about with P1 and P2. If we blow up the window part of that drawing, we can see on the big hatched panel in between the windows, in the top left-hand corner, we've got P1, yes?
Yes, two large panels, which are P1, and one small panel, which is a P2.
And P2 is in the kitchen windows, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
And it housed the kitchen extract fan.
Yes, yes.
Now, when you were considering what materials to put in your specification that you listed out, did you ever go back and consult the NBS to see what Studio E had recommended?
I believe I did, and there's nothing in there, well, as we've just read.
Do you ever recall any discussions with anybody at any stage about fire safety in respect of these window infill panels?
No. Just went and said, what panels are we going to put in here? And that's when I was directed to Ben or Ben directed me to panel systems.
Did you yourself ever consider the fire performance of the window infill panels?
No. Not of the P1s, no.
Now, we can see in January 2015 you attended a meeting at which this was discussed. So if we go to HAR 403882, so this is a meeting, a progress meeting number 1, and we see Rob Maxwell, Ray Bailey, Mark Stapley, Kevin Lamb, you're all in attendance on the right-hand side.
Yes.
And then if we look on to page 3, item 8, we see sandwich panels, RAL 9010, source from new supplier, yes?
Yeah.
And the action is said to be for all. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Can you help us? Was that referring to the material for the window infill panels?
That's referring to the P1 panels.
Yeah. And who was the original supplier? It says, spelt wrong, but it says source from new supplier. Who was the original supplier?
I don't know who they used to buy their panels from.
And you don't know why they needed to find a new supplier?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Now, shortly afterwards, on the 15th of January, if we look at document HAR 403866, if we blow up this specification note on the left-hand side and look at the P1 and P2, and I just want to look at the main black text to start with.
Yeah.
For the glazing P1 panels, it says outer aluminium skin, RAL 9010, and then core 24mm Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we see the same for the P2 panel below it.
Yeah, that's right.
So is it right that based on this, you initially had TP10 specified for the P1 and P2 panels?
This was never issued outside of Harley. This was issued internally for comment.
Yes, I understand that, but
Yeah,
just want to get
that was a standard product that I've used over many years, so I put it on there for us to discuss.
Yes, so that's what we're just trying to get to the bottom of. It was you who put the TP10 in, and was that off your own back? You didn't have that suggested to you by anyone at Harley?
No, it was just a suggestion to be discussed.
And why did you select that TP10 product to start with?
Because it's a Class O panel that I've used many times over the years.
A Class O panel.
Correct, yeah.
Now, we saw in the MBS spec that this was an insulating panel.
Yeah.
Did you check with approved document B or any other piece of guidance what any insulating material in an external wall had to be in terms of compliance?
Not specifically to this, no.
So you didn't check, for example, in section 12 of ADB and come across 12.7 that makes clear that any insulating material for a wall in a building above 18 metres needed to be of limited combustibility. That wasn't something that you checked.
I think, I mean, with hindsight now, I think it's quite clear that there's doubt whether this actually applies because it's in a panel. I think the documentation is more referring to the product which is screwed to the wall rather than as a core of an insulated panel.
When you say you think it's quite clear that there's doubt whether this actually applies, what do you mean? What do you mean by this? Doubt about what applying?
Well, the ADB, does that not just mean the material, the insulation itself, when it's used on its own? this is comprised of a product with an insulent core.
So is what you're
So it has
saying that
different
because
properties.
it was wrapped in aluminium and it wasn't like just a board insulation on its own,
Yeah.
your understanding was that you didn't have to worry about those parts of ADB? Was that actually a thought process you went through at the time?
I've been told all these years, I've been led to believe that this configuration gives you a Class O panel.
Yes, but what I'm asking is whether you checked in ADB whether Class 0 was enough for this kind of panel, or whether you needed something else.
No, when you look at diagram 40, it implies that Class O is okay to be used over 18 metres.
What I want to know is whether you checked in ADB whether Class 0 was enough for this kind of panel. Did you do that check?
No. This was offered to the team for comment,
Yeah.
which is why we're here now.
And did you ever think about paragraph 12.7 of ADB
No,
that makes clear that an insulating material within an external wall above 18 metres must be of limited combustibility?
no.
And just to be clear, when you were specifying these panels, were you thinking, well, this is Class 0, that's okay?
I wasn't specifying, I was suggesting them to the team.
Okay. When you were suggesting them to the team, did you think, well, this is Class 0, so that should be okay?
I was suggesting them as a Class 0 panel. I wouldn't have thought further than that.
Yes. So Class 0 was in your mind?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, can you help us as to who then applied the red annotations that we see to the right on P1?
I believe that was Mark Stapley.
Yeah. And can you help us as to why that insulation material was amended by Mark Stapley?
Well, I would guess he's checked this with the manufacturers and that they could offer styrofoam cores. This
I
would
see.
be
So-
the styrofoam. This would be a cheaper product, the styrofoam with thinner skins of aluminium
Yeah.
rather than what I've shown.
Cheaper than the TP10.
That's correct, yes.
And from those annotations, did you understand that the as above for the P2 panel meant that styrofoam was also going to be used for that panel as well?
Yes, but we did discuss that wasn't possible because panel systems could only supply a panel with the same colour on each side of the panel. The P2 panels had a different colour inside to outside.
So what happened about the P2 panels,
They were happy to go with what was shown there.
the TP10?
Yes.
Our experts on site have found some kitchen extract panels with a styrofoam core. Can you help us understand why that was? Why that might have been?
I don't follow the quality control of. I do my best to put things on the drawing. If the team purchase something else, I've got no control over that at all.
Now, we can see, if we go to a further version of these specification notes, this is HAR 403869. So this is a further version. We don't have anything in the table in the middle below, but we've got a Studio E stamp on the right.
Yeah.
And if we blow up the left-hand side, there, the P1 panel has been changed to styrofoam, but the P2 panel hasn't.
Correct.
Now, can you help us as to why we see that in this version of the specification notes?
Because this is following that discussion and the marked up drawing. So this is typical of one of our round the table discussions where we said, okay, change it to this, change it to that, we'll send it out. So this is our internal changes
I see.
put out to the rest of the team.
Yeah. So is the sequence of events that you specified TP10 for both, then Mark Stapley tried to say, let's have styrofoam for both.
Yes.
Then you realised after that you couldn't have the styrofoam for the P2 panel.
Correct.
So that stayed as per your suggestion.
That's correct, yes.
So would you accept that you did specify TP10 for the P2 panel.
I suggested it to the team.
Yeah. And that ended up being accepted.
Yes, yeah, Harley were happy and so was the architect.
Before you specified the TP10, you've said why you specified it. You used it before. You thought it was class 0. Did you have any discussions with anybody at Harley before you put TP10 on the original version of this spec?
No, I would have just put something down on paper so as we could discuss. And as it's a product that I often put down on paper, it went down there as a starting point.
Did you undertake any checks before you suggested the TP10 product for use on the Grenfell project?
No, I'd been assured that was a Class O product many, many years ago.
Who had you been assured by that it was a Class 0 product many years ago?
It was from a fabricator via a client of mine.
Did you take any steps to investigate the fire performance of TP10 before you put it on the spec notes?
No.
Had you ever, prior to the project, seen any BBA certificates for these panels?
No.
Did you investigate whether it was an appropriate product for use on buildings over 18 metres?
No, all I knew that it was a Class O assembly.
Did you appreciate at the time that the building being over 18 metres might make a difference in terms of what insulation products were compliant?
Yeah, yes, maybe, but the point is, I put this to the Harley team as a Class O product, and they were happy, as was the architect.
Yeah, can I just repeat my question? Did you appreciate at the time that the building being over 18 metres might make a difference in terms of what insulation products were compliant?
Possibly, yes.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Can you be any more specific as to whether or not you knew that over 18 metres might make a difference to an insulation product?
You're saying I've got to be positive about something that might be?
I'm asking you whether you had an awareness that the building being over 18 metres might make a difference to what insulation products you were using in the external wall.
Can you put that a different way?
I think the point, Mr. Lamb, that's being put to you is, at the time when you considered this matter, did you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, this building is over 18 metres in height, that might affect what can be put on it? Did that process go through your mind?
Well, yes, certainly.
Right.
But I did put this to Harley as a Class O product.
Thank you. Let's look at the BBA certificate for the Kingspan Thermopitch TP10. This is KIN 50276. So here we have the BBA certificate. We can see at the bottom in the paler blue box that the date of first issue was the 30th of January 2009. So this certificate significantly predated the Grenfell project. Do you think you ever saw this certificate prior to the Grenfell project?
I don't believe so, no.
And if we look behaviour in relation to fire, it says the product will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. When tested to BS 4767, 1987, the product achieved a Class 1 rating. Do you see that there?
The product in its own form, yes.
Yes.
We weren't using it in that particular form.
I see. So are you saying that when you specified TP10, and you're saying it had a Class 0 rating,
Yeah.
you're referring to something different to just TP10, are you?
It was an assembly. So we started with the manufacturer starts with the insulation, and then they pressure bond 2 thick pieces of aluminium, one to each face. So it's now a sandwich. So that the properties of that material may be different as an assembly.
Are you saying that you knew that the surface of that assembled product attracted class naught?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
And how did you know that?
Well, I'd never checked any documentation, but I've been told that, yes.
Told it by who?
It was a client from many, many years ago.
Right. Would you agree with me, though, if we're just looking at the TP10 itself as an insulation product, here what we're seeing is it's achieved a class 1, which would not be sufficient?
But it wasn't used in this form, so
I see.
it's irrelevant.
So what we don't see in this BBA certificate, do we, just to be clear, is it's saying that the TP10 was class 0.
No.
Immediately below product scope and summary of certificate, if we can go back up to the top of this. It says this certificate relates to Kingspan Thermopitch TP10 board, a warm roof insulation system using rigid polyisocyanurate PIR board faced on both sides with aluminium foil for use in pitched roofs in new and existing domestic and non-domestic buildings. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So were you aware that in its raw form, albeit it's got aluminium foil on both sides, it was an insulation product for use in roofing insulation?
Not specifically, but it was for roofing, but I was aware that it was a general building product.
And why would you specify this product for your core of these aluminium panels? Why do that?
Well, as I said, this is a product that was offered to me many years ago. Once the manufacturer takes this and combines it with the aluminium skins, he's creating another product. So I'm not suggesting that we use a roof insulation. I'm suggesting that we use a sandwich panel.
But did it ever occur to you that once the aluminium melts or delaminates, inside there you have combustible insulation?
The aluminium is compressed. First of all, it's pressure bonded, but the aluminium and the insulation is all held together within the rebates of the window, so it couldn't delaminate.
So are you saying that in a fire, the aluminium skins of these panels couldn't come off?
Correct.
Well, that's not what happened at Grenfell, is it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, don't forget this is different to the P1s. There was none of this on the north and south elevations, and the panels that were involved, there were only tiny panels, about 400 millimetres square. So don't get confused.
I'm going to put my question in a simpler way. Did it ever occur to you that there was combustible insulation inside this product, and you ought to at least check that that was something that was appropriate to put on an external wall of a tall building above 18 metres?
No, I didn't consider that, and it was offered to the team as a suggestion. Harley's got far more experience of this sort of thing than myself, as is the architect.
And would you agree that you had no evidence at the time that these panels were of limited combustibility?
No.
Now, paragraph 39 of your witness statement on page 11, you say in the second sentence, my remit did not involve choice of materials or specifications for the cladding or insulation. Do you see that there?
Correct.
Would you agree with me that the P2 panel is an example of where your remit did involve, maybe not the specifying it yourself if you're drawing a distinction between who specifies it, but certainly you were involved in the choice of that material, weren't you?
Yes, my remit didn't require that I specified anything, but trying to be helpful, I suggested that for the team to consider.
Yeah. Now, on the P1 panel, if we go back to that, and we go back to the specification SEA 403060, Mr. Chairman, I've not got long to finish my question. So if you're happy, I'd quite like to finish this topic and then break. And
How
then
long is long?
Well, I've got 2 pages of questions, so
I'm not sure.
5
that gives me
minutes.
much. Oh, 5 minutes. Oh, well, that's all right.
If we go back to that specification, the design of the infill panel at P1 was going to be styrofoam, yes?
Yes.
Once it was changed, and you reflected that here.
Mm-hmm.
Were you aware at the time that styrofoam is a trading name for extruded polystyrene insulation material, otherwise known as XPS?
No.
Do you know why a specific product was not specified at this point in the design process? It just says core styrofoam. You haven't actually specified a product, have you?
Well, you saw the markup from the previous pages.
You've just taken
I've
Mark
taken
Stapley.
what Mark Stapley said and I've put it down. But I don't think it would have needed any more than just styrofoam. I don't think at the time there were any grades of styrofoam that performed differently.
I see. To what extent did you consider, or did you discuss with anyone at Harley, whether the use of styrofoam in the P1 panel was compliant with the building regulations and associated guidance in ADB?
I didn't need to. I was told what product to use.
Did you ever consider whether those panels as insulating panels fell within 12.7 of ADB and therefore needed to be of limited combustibility?
No, never considered that, no. Oh, and just a point. Could I go back? Apologise.
Yes.
You say that the P2 panels did actually burn.
The panels around the kitchen extract fan?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we saw a good example of that outside flat 16 when the fire broke out.
Did that one have Kingspan core or the styrofoam core?
I'm not sure there was much left of the core to know.
So it's
exactly
difficult to
what
know
that
if
was.
they're the ones that I specified or not.
Yeah. I don't think we can take it any further.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. When you added styrofoam, I appreciate you say you were acting on Mark Stapley's instructions. Were you aware of its fire performance?
No.
Were you aware that it's not of limited combustibility?
No. But again, as a sandwich panel, I would assume the properties to be slightly different from the core.
Did you take any steps to assess whether that panel was suitable for use on buildings above 18 metres?
Not at all. That was outside my remit.
Were you aware of warnings within approved document B about insulating core panel systems, including extruded polystyrene?
No.
So you weren't aware that in Appendix F, it warns that these types of panels can be particularly dangerous, including for firefighters?
No.
You weren't aware of that?
Was it actually saying you shouldn't use them?
Let's look at that. CLG 50224 at page 147. So this is Appendix F, fire behaviour of insulating core panels used for internal structures. Insulating core panel systems are used for external cladding as well as for internal structures. Do you see that in paragraph 1?
Yeah.
And that's how you were using these, wasn't it? Insulating core panels for external
Correct.
cladding.
Yes.
And then if we go down, the most common use of insulating core panels when used for internal structures is X. It says in the next paragraph, these panels typically consist of an inner core sandwiched between and bonded to facings of galvanized steel, often with a PVC facing for hygiene purposes. The panels are then formed into a structure by jointing systems, usually designed to provide an insulating and hygienic performance. The panel structure can be freestanding, but it's usually attached to the building structure by lightweight fixings or hangers. And then it's got the most common forms of insulation in present use are, and you can see polystyrene and extruded polystyrene are in that list. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then if you look on the right-hand side under the heading firefighting, it says this: when compared with other types of construction techniques, these panel systems therefore provide a unique combination of problems for firefighters, including hidden fire spread within panels with thermoplastic cores, production of large quantities of black toxic smoke, and rapid fire spread leading to flashover, hidden fire behind lining systems. These three characteristics are common to both polyurethane and polystyrene cored panels, although the rate of fire spread in polyurethane is significantly less.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty clear warning, isn't it?
I think it's fair to say, Miss Grange, that's really all directed to the use of these panels as internal dividing walls, isn't it? That's the whole context of what's been said here.
Well, it says in paragraph 1 on the left-hand side at the top.
I know what it says up there, but if you read on, the whole context of the following paragraph seems to be directed to the use of these panels as internal dividers, and that's why they're a problem for firefighters who will have to go into the building.
Well, I'm not sure that was the evidence of Dr. Lane at phase 1, but anyway.
I think you may find it was.
If we go to the next page. We see there specifying panel core materials. Where at all possible, the specification of panels with core materials appropriate to the application will help ensure an acceptable level of performance when involved in fire conditions. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes.
But were you aware of these warnings in approved document B about these types of panels?
No, I wasn't, but it indicates to me that it should be considered, but it's not saying you shouldn't use these materials.
Just above. Sorry, just above. I'm being told just above this. At the top of the page.
Just above the heading specified core panels.
Yes. My attention is being drawn to the, in summary, the performance of the building structure, including the insulating envelope, the superstructure, the substructure, must be considered in relation to their performance in the event of fire. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes. But as sandwich panels to be used as infill panels, I don't think it quite applies.
You didn't think that was...
No,
quite
well, on the
applicable?
previous page it says that special care has got to be taken to the fixing of these back to the building. Well, in our case, the panel is self-supporting within a window frame.
Right.
So it shouldn't fall away and
But I think it was your evidence just a moment ago that you weren't aware these panels were extruded polystyrene. Is that correct?
I'd never considered what styrofoam was. I knew it was a rigid insulation of some sort.
And you didn't give any consideration to the fire performance of those panels
I didn't need to, no.
on the external wall?
No.
Are you aware that anybody within Harley, we can see that it was Mr. Stapley that suggested these styrofoam panels. Are you aware of whether there was any discussions within Harley about the appropriateness of these panels?
I would assume it was a product that they'd used many times before. I'm sure their projects over the years must have incorporated sandwich panels. So.
I see.
But that's an assumption.
Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my questions.
Right.
That would
Very
be
good.
an appropriate moment.
Yes, it
for a
would.
break.
Thank you very much. Well, now we'll have a break at this point,
Okay.
Mr. Lamb. Ms. Grange thinks she's got to the end of her questions, but we always allow a short time so that Council can just check that there aren't further things that need to be covered.
Okay.
How long do you think you might need, Ms. Grange? Should we say quarter to
15
4?
minutes, yes.
Yes. Right, we'll come back at 3:45, please.
Okay.
I don't suppose you'll have much chance to talk to anyone about your evidence, but if you do, don't take it, please.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much. Good. Thank you. Quarter
Thank
to
you.
4. Yes, would you ask Mr. Lamb to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Lamb.
Yes,
Good.
yes, thank
Now,
you.
Miss Grange, did you find some more questions?
Just a few very short questions.
Well,
Yes.
well, right, off you go then.
Thank you. First question, on the styrofoam and the switch from TP10 to styrofoam,
Yes.
did you get the impression that the styrofoam was being selected because it was cheaper?
I had no reason to consider that. It's a very common core for insulated panels. So I don't think that was the prime motive, to be honest.
But would it in fact have been cheaper?
To be honest, I don't believe styrofoam is a cheap product.
Right, okay. Were you aware in October 2014 that Panel Systems did offer an FR version of their insulated core panel, an A1 version with a mineral fibre core?
No, I wasn't.
Now, we talked about the head of the building and that annotation you made in blue on your CAD drawing,
Yes.
headed fire break. Can you explain why did you not raise that issue directly with Studio E and ask them whether or not they required cavity barriers at the very head of the building?
We didn't generally, or I wouldn't generally raise any issues. Generally, the drawing speaks for itself. It's there for full checking.
I see. So that's the way you left it. Just
That's
if
right.
it's not there on the drawing, they can check that.
Yes, yes.
And you didn't think to have a direct conversation with them about it?
No. But I mean, to be honest, we didn't have much success when discussing the fire breaks at the earlier stage. I can't imagine we would have got anywhere with this.
I see. Now, Mr. Lamb, we've gone through a lot of questions about the project and your role on it. What would you have done differently, knowing what we know now?
Well, without the luxury of hindsight, and just considering I was a design resource, a freelance design resource, I don't think that there was anything different I could have done. However, it's quite clear from a lot of our conversations that there's a total lack of clarity in the regulations that everyone's supposed to adhere to. And I really think something needs to be done just to take the ambiguity out of the documentation that everyone's expected to conform to.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming to give your evidence, Mr. Lamb. It's been very useful to hear from you.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry it's taken up quite a lot of your time, but that can't be helped.
No, it's
Anyway,
fine.
it's all over now. You're free to go.
Thank you very much.
indeed.
Cheers.
Well, Miss Grange, I take it that that's it for the day.
That is it for the day, and another Harley witness on Monday.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, we'll stop at that point and resume at 10 o'clock on Monday then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.